I can still smell the champagne, sweet and sharp, bubbling in crystal glasses as everyone raised them toward my husband. David stood at the head of the table, silver-haired and smiling, surrounded by 40 years of colleagues, friends, and family. His retirement party. The moment we'd been planning for 2 years. The moment that should have marked the beginning of our golden years together. But when his brother stood up to give the toast, I felt my stomach drop. "To David," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the private room of Romano's Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago. "My baby brother, who somehow managed to coast through 4 decades at Henderson and Associates doing, well, what exactly did you do there, Dave?" Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. I gripped my napkin under the table. Marcus continued, grinning. I'm kidding. But seriously, folks, while some of us were building actual businesses, taking real risks, David here showed up, pushed papers around, and collected a steady paycheck. The American dream, right? The path of least resistance. He raised his glass higher. To my brother, who proved you don't have to be extraordinary to make it to retirement, just persistent enough not to get fired. The room fell silent. I watched the color drain from David's face. Our daughter Emma gasped beside me. Even Marcus's wife Diane looked horrified. Then someone laughed. One of Marcus's friends from his country club, then another. And suddenly half the room was chuckling, like Marcus had made some clever joke instead of humiliating his own brother at the man's retirement celebration. David forced a smile and raised his glass. "Thanks, Mark. Always knew I could count on you for the heartfelt speeches." But I saw his hand shake as he drank. I saw the way he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes for the rest of the evening, and I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. My husband is the kindest man I've ever known. For 42 years, he's been my steady rock. He worked his way up from junior analyst to senior partner at Henderson and Associates. He paid for our daughter's college without loans. He took care of his mother through her final years while Marcus was too busy with his tech startup. And this is how his own brother treated him, in front of everyone who mattered to him? I smiled through the rest of dinner. I made small talk. I thanked people for coming. But my mind was elsewhere. Because this wasn't the first time Marcus had belittled David. It had been happening for years, actually. Little digs at family gatherings. Comments about David's boring corporate job compared to Marcus's entrepreneurial success. Jokes about how David played it safe, while Marcus took chances. But something about tonight felt different. There was a meanness in Marcus's eyes I hadn't seen before, an edge to his words that went beyond sibling rivalry. And then I remembered something. 3 months ago, David had come home from lunch with Marcus looking troubled. When I asked what was wrong, he'd shaken his head. Nothing, just Marcus being Marcus. Wanted to borrow money again. Again. I'd let it go then. But now, sitting in that restaurant watching my husband's humiliation, I realized I should have asked more questions. The party ended around 10. We drove home in silence, David staring out the window. When we pulled into our driveway in Oak Park, he finally spoke. "I'm sorry." "For what?" I turned to him. "For ruining the party." I should have laughed it off. Matched his tone. I froze. "David." I took his hand. "You didn't ruin anything. Marcus did." What he said was cruel and uncalled for. He squeezed my hand but didn't respond. We went inside, got ready for bed, and lay in the dark. But I couldn't sleep. Marcus's words kept replaying. While some of us were building actual businesses, taking real risks, his business. Tech Venture Solutions. Marcus had started it 15 years ago, and according to him, it was worth millions now. He lived in a mansion in Winnetka, drove a Tesla, sent his kids to private school. All while David and I lived comfortably but modestly on David's corporate salary and my teaching pension. And yet, over the past decade, Marcus had asked David for money at least 5 times that I knew of. Small amounts at first, 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Cash flow issues, he'd say. Just until this deal closes. David always gave it to him. Brothers help brothers, he'd say. But if Marcus's business was so successful, why did he keep needing money from his paper-pushing brother? I got out of bed quietly and went to David's home office. He kept meticulous records of everything, God bless him. I found the file labeled Marcus, Personal Loans in the 3rd drawer. What I found made my hands shake. Over the past 15 years, David had loaned Marcus $237,000. $237,000. The loans were documented, signed, with agreed-upon repayment terms, and according to David's notes, Marcus hadn't repaid a single cent. Not one payment. Ever. I sat back in the desk chair, my mind racing. David had never told me the full extent of it. I'd known about a few loans, but not this. Not this much. And then I saw another folder. Marcus. Business documents. I pulled it out. Inside were papers David had co-signed, guarantees, agreements that made David personally liable for business debts if Marcus's company defaulted. My hands trembled as I read through them. This couldn't be right. David would never put our retirement savings at risk like this, would he? But the signatures were his, notarized and dated. I spent the next 3 hours going through every document. What I discovered made me sick. Marcus's successful business was a house of cards. He'd convinced David to co-sign on multiple business loans totaling over $400,000. He'd used David as a guarantor for office leases. He'd even listed David as a personal reference on credit applications, falsely stating that David was a business partner. And, according to the most recent letter in the file, dated just 2 weeks ago, Tech Venture Solutions was being sued by 3 different creditors. The lawsuits named Marcus as the primary debtor and David as the guarantor. My husband was about to lose everything we'd saved for 40 years because his brother had lied to him, used him, and then publicly humiliated him at his own retirement party. I sat in that office until dawn, reading and rereading everything. Part of me wanted to wake David up right then, to demand answers. But I knew my husband. He'd known about the lawsuits. That's why he'd looked so troubled after his lunch with Marcus 3 months ago. Marcus must have told him then, probably tried to downplay it. And David, being David, hadn't wanted to worry me. But there was something else in the file. An envelope marked, "Do not open. For Janet only if something happens to me." My name. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter dated 6 years ago. "Janet, my love," it began. "If you're reading this, it means something has gone terribly wrong and I'm not here to fix it. I need you to know the truth about Marcus and his business. 6 years ago, Marcus came to me in crisis. Tech Venture was failing. He'd taken out loans he couldn't repay, made promises to investors he couldn't keep. He begged me to help him save face, to co-sign just one loan so he could restructure. He said if I didn't, he'd lose everything, and Mom, who was still alive then, would be devastated to see her oldest son fail. I did it for Mom, Janet, and then he came back for more, and more, each time saying it was the last time, each time saying the business was about to turn around. I kept hoping he was right. I kept believing my brother wouldn't deliberately destroy me. But I've started to suspect that Marcus has been using my financial stability to cover his failures for years. I've documented everything in case it ever comes to legal action. If you're reading this letter, please protect yourself. Hire a lawyer. Don't let him take you down with me. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was ashamed. I was afraid you'd be disappointed in me for being so naive. You always saw through Marcus in ways I couldn't. I love you forever, David." I held that letter and cried. Not because I was disappointed in David, but because my kind, trusting husband had carried this burden alone for 6 years, had let his brother slowly destroy him while he smiled and tried to believe the best of people. Well, no more. I spent the next 2 weeks doing something I'd never done before. I investigated my brother-in-law. I started by calling my nephew, Marcus's oldest son, Connor. He was 28, worked in finance, and had always been close to David. Over coffee, I asked careful questions about his father's business. "Honestly, Aunt Janet?" Connor leaned forward. "I don't think Dad's business has been solvent in years. He lives way beyond his means. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. Mom doesn't know it, but I've seen the bank statements. He's 6 months behind on the mortgage. But he seems so successful. That's the image he sells. But I work in finance, remember? I know the signs of someone drowning. Dad's been drowning for a decade." The next person I called was harder. Angela Chen, a forensic accountant I'd taught with years ago before she changed careers. We'd stayed friends. I explained the situation and asked if she'd look at the documents I'd found. 2 days later, she called me back. Janet, your brother-in-law is running a shell game. Tech Venture Solutions has no legitimate revenue stream that I can find. He's been using new investor money to pay off old investors. Classic Ponzi structure. And he's been siphoning money from the business to maintain his lifestyle. Your husband's loans kept the whole thing afloat, but it's collapsing now. Those lawsuits are just the beginning. When this fully unravels, David could be liable for over $600,000. $600,000, our entire retirement savings, plus the equity in our home. Can we protect ourselves? I asked. Maybe. But you need to act fast. And Janet? Angela paused. You need to document everything, because when this goes public, Marcus is going to try to blame David. He'll say David was a partner who knew everything. He'll try to drag David down with him. That's when I made my decision. I needed to protect my husband. But I also needed to do something I hadn't done in 42 years of marriage. I needed to take a stand against someone in our family. The next family gathering was Easter Sunday, 2 weeks away. The annual Caldwell family dinner at Marcus and Diane's house in Winnetka. 35 people, all the extended family. Marcus always hosted, always played the generous patriarch. I spent those 2 weeks gathering evidence. Angela helped me compile everything into a binder. Bank records, loan documents, the lawsuits, emails where Marcus had lied about his business's performance, text messages where he'd promised to repay David next month for the past 5 years. I also spent time agonizing over what I was about to do, because I knew it would change everything. David noticed I was preoccupied. You okay? He asked one evening. Just thinking about Easter, I said, which was true. We don't have to go if you don't want to, after what Marcus said at my party. Oh, we're going, I said firmly. We're definitely going. But I also did something else. Something I learned from the criticism in my head. I called Diane, Marcus's wife. We met for lunch 3 days before Easter. Diane and I had never been close, but we'd always been cordial. I debated whether to tell her in advance, whether to give her a heads up about what I'd discovered. Looking at her across the table at that cafe in Evanston, I made my choice. Diane, I need to tell you something about Marcus, about his business, and I want you to hear it from me first, before Easter. Her face paled. I know, she whispered. You know? I've known for years that something was wrong. The money never added up. The stress, the late-night phone calls. She looked away. I didn't want to know the details. I was afraid. He's been using David, I said gently, for 15 years. Taking loans he never intended to repay, using him as a guarantor for business debts. David's about to lose everything we've saved. Diane started crying quietly. I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have warned you. But he's my husband, and I didn't know how to. I reached across and took her hand. I'm going to tell the family at Easter dinner. I'm going to show them the evidence. I wanted you to know first because you're not the one who did this. Marcus is, and I don't want you blindsided. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for not hating me. I don't hate you, Diane. I feel sorry for both of us for believing in men who made terrible choices. Easter Sunday arrived. David and I drove to Winnetka in silence. He dressed in his usual khakis and blue button-down. I wore my best dress, the navy one with the pearl buttons. I felt like I was going into battle. The house was full when we arrived, kids running around the yard, adults drinking wine in the living room, Marcus holding court as usual, telling stories about his latest business venture, some tech partnership in California. I watched him perform, and I felt nothing but cold clarity. Dinner was at 2. We all gathered around Marcus's enormous dining room table, extended to fit everyone. Turkey, ham, all the traditional sides. Marcus sat at the head, of course. Diane at the other end, barely touching her food. After dessert, Marcus stood up. Before everyone leaves, I want to say something. He picked up his wine glass. I want to thank you all for being here. Family is everything, right? Blood is thicker than water. He looked directly at David. Even when some family members are more successful than others, we're all still family. We all still support each other. That last jab, that final little insult, I stood up. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Marcus, I said, my voice steady. Since we're talking about family and support, I think everyone here should know exactly how you've been supporting David for the past 15 years. Marcus's smile faltered. Janet, this isn't the time. No, I think it's exactly the time. I pulled out the binder I'd kept on my lap. You see, for the past 15 years, Marcus has borrowed $237,000 from David. Personal loans, all documented, all with repayment terms. He hasn't repaid a single dollar. Gasps around the table. David reached for my arm. Janet, don't. And beyond that, I continued, Marcus convinced David to co-sign business loans and guarantees totaling over $400,000. David's retirement savings, our financial security, put at risk for Marcus's failing business. That's not true, Marcus shouted. My business is successful. Janet, you don't know what you're talking about. Tech Venture Solutions is being sued by 3 creditors, I said, opening the binder and holding up the documents. You're 6 months behind on your mortgage. You've been running what's essentially a Ponzi scheme, using new investor money to pay old investors. And when it all collapses, you were going to let David take the fall. The room erupted, people shouting questions. Marcus's face turned red. David sat frozen, staring at the table. Marcus's mother, David's mother, our mother-in-law, Grace, stood up, her face pale. Marcus, is this true? Mom, she's exaggerating. It's just some temporary cash flow issues. $600,000 is not temporary. I held up the forensic accounting report. This is from a professional accountant. Your son has been defrauding investors and using David as his safety net for 15 years. And after all that, he had the nerve to publicly humiliate David at his retirement party. I turned to the rest of the family. I know this is uncomfortable. I know this ruins Easter. But I couldn't let Marcus keep lying. I couldn't let him destroy David in silence while everyone thought he was the successful one and David was just coasting. I looked at Marcus. My husband gave you everything because he loved you, because he trusted you, and you betrayed him over and over. And then you tried to make him feel small about it. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Connor, Marcus's son, spoke. Dad, I've been asking you about the business for months. I've been begging you to be honest with me. Is what Aunt Janet's saying true? Marcus looked around the room at all the faces staring at him, his wife crying, his mother in shock, his children waiting for an answer. He sank back into his chair. I made mistakes. The business had some problems. I was trying to fix it. I was going to pay David back when things turned around. When? I demanded. When were you going to pay him back? After you'd taken everything? After you'd left us with nothing? David finally spoke, his voice quiet. Marcus, did you ever actually intend to pay me back? The brothers stared at each other across the table. Marcus didn't answer. That was answer enough. People started leaving shortly after that. The Easter gathering dissolved into uncomfortable goodbyes and awkward silences. Grace, our mother-in-law, approached me on her way out. I'm sorry, she said, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry my son did this to you. To David. It's not your fault, Grace. I raised him to be better than this. She looked back at the house. I don't know who he became. David and I drove home in silence again, but this time it felt different. Lighter, somehow. You didn't have to do that, he said finally. Yes, I did. Everyone will talk. The family's going to be torn apart. The family was already torn apart, David. Marcus did that. I just pulled back the curtain. He was quiet for a long moment. How long have you known? Since your retirement party. I found the files that night. And the letter? Yes. The letter, too. I reached over and took his hand. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you carry this alone? I was ashamed. I'm a financial professional, Janet. I should have seen what he was doing. I should have said no. But he's my brother, and I kept hoping. His voice cracked. I kept hoping he'd change, that he'd do the right thing. That's not naivety, David. That's love. You loved your brother, and he took advantage of that. That's on him, not you. We spent the next few weeks dealing with lawyers. Angela's recommendations saved us. We were able to legally separate David from Marcus's debts, proving that David had been misled and defrauded. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't cheap, but we protected our retirement savings. Marcus's business collapsed 2 months later, The investigation revealed even more fraud than we'd discovered. He declared bankruptcy and is currently facing criminal charges. Diane filed for divorce. She and the kids moved to a smaller house in Arlington Heights. She calls me sometimes, and we talk. She's working now, rebuilding her life. She thanked me once for telling the truth, even though it hurt. I needed to know, she said. I needed to stop living in denial. The family split, as David predicted. Some people thought I was cruel for exposing Marcus so publicly. His sister Lisa hasn't spoken to us since Easter. She thinks I should have handled it privately, that I humiliated Marcus unnecessarily. Maybe she's right. Maybe I could have given Marcus the documents privately and told him to make it right. Maybe I could have been more compassionate. But I also remember that retirement party. I remember watching my kind, honest husband's face as his brother belittled him in front of everyone he cared about. I remember reading David's letter, learning that he'd carried this shame and fear for 6 years alone. And I know that if I'd handled it privately, Marcus would have found a way to weasel out of it. He would have made excuses, asked for more time, convinced David to wait just a little longer. The truth needed to be public, because Marcus's lies had been public. He'd built his image on David's silence. It's been 4 months now. David officially retired, though not in the way we'd planned. We're rebuilding, financially and emotionally. We downsized from our house in Oak Park to a condo in Naperville. It's smaller, but it's enough. Emma, our daughter, comes over every Sunday now. She was furious when she first learned everything, angry that we hadn't told her sooner. But she understands now. She hugged me last week and whispered, "Thank you for protecting Dad. He wouldn't have protected himself." She's right. He wouldn't have. David's different now. Quieter, but also lighter. Like a weight's been lifted. He told me last night that he hasn't talked to Marcus since Easter. Marcus has tried calling a few times, leaving messages that start with anger and end with begging. David deletes them without listening. "I grieved my brother years ago," he told me. "I grieved the person I thought he was. Finding out who he really is just confirms what I already knew in my heart. As for me, I don't regret what I did. I know some people think I was wrong, that I was vindictive or cruel, but I did what I thought was right to protect my husband and our future. Sometimes love means speaking up even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it means being the strong one when your partner can't be. And sometimes it means being willing to be the villain in someone else's story so you can be the hero in your own. I chose truth over family harmony. I chose my husband over keeping the peace, and I'd make the same choice again tomorrow. Because at the end of the day, I can look at David across our smaller condo, in our smaller life, and know that it's truly ours. No lies. No hidden debts. No brothers who take advantage of trust. Just us, starting over, together. And that's worth more than any Easter dinner, any family gathering, any amount of keeping up appearances. Sometimes the truth shatters everything. But what's built from the pieces is stronger than what was there before. At least, that's what I tell myself. And most days, I believe it.